Story 1. My 8th grade math teacher. I was a very insecure kid. I gave myself a bad bangs haircut and tried covering it with a headband. This teacher noticed, made me take off my headband, and stand in front of the class to show them. She then took me into the next room to show the other teacher. The whole time, she was laughing. There were more things that she did like this, but this one sticks out the most. It was awful. I hope she had a miserable life, and I don't even feel bad saying that.
She really didn't. I believe she was fired a few years later, but I can't remember what for. It's been 20 years, and I still think about some of the things she did to me. I feel like she knew that if she humiliated me enough, then I wouldn't complain or report her or whatnot. I have no idea if that's true, but it's what I've kind of summed up over the years.
That woman didn't even need to be a teacher. I hope she gets a sudden case of diarrhea and gets stuck in traffic.
My worst teacher was also the female 8th grade math teacher, Mrs. Harrison. She looked like a soap opera villain and was just nasty.
Story 2. A 9th grade math teacher tied up her kids, murdered her husband, tried to fake her own abduction, and then killed herself when it didn't pan out.
Well, mine berated me for thinking that balance was a sense. Obviously, that is worse.
Ooh, I know Wyoming. This totally fits Gillette.
Okay, that was way worse than I expected.
Story 3. High school history teacher. Dude set up several field trips, which were just taking a group of students to work construction side jobs he had with his construction company. The one that sucked the most was what he described as a nature retreat over a weekend. He told everyone we'd be learning about native and settler history. What we actually did was spend 3 days rebuilding the wooden walkways and patios at a nature center. There were 0 history lessons.
Not a history teacher, but the school where I did my student teaching had a construction trades teacher who did the same thing. He was essentially using his students as free labor. He got let go eventually.
Sounds like some kind of Russian Green Beret. Probably killed 16 Chechen rebels single-handedly. Anyway, for dollars a pound.
He was just giving hands-on lessons about being a Russian soldier.
Story 4. We had a messaging app, and I said, I'm going to go shower now. And he said, I wish I could join. I was 13.
It's not too late if he's still teaching. Even if you can't prove it, it's good to have a complaint on file. If there's a pattern of complaints, they'll take action. A teacher in my area finally got held accountable about 12 to 13 years after grooming and molesting a girl. It turns out there'd been complaints on file before a victim reported it years later. The school district had to pay out a whole lot of money for not doing anything about it before the teacher, also female, moved up from inappropriate behavior to actual molestation.
I never understood why people at workplaces talk like this in a messaging app managed by the organization. It's like they're completely unaware that a super user can see all communications. I've even had people at past jobs get in trouble for talking negatively about a coworker on Microsoft Teams, and they seemed completely unaware that those could be found. Rule of thumb: if the company pays for the equipment, software licenses, and team subscription, never assume that what you do while using their equipment is anonymous.
Story 5. Mrs. Pop. I had a difficult time in her class, and one day we had some goofy coloring activity, and I absolutely killed it. She said in front of the whole class, well, at least you can color in the lines. Fucking bitch.
Truly, that's very bitchy behavior. You're a bitch, Mrs. Pop.
Story 6. A math teacher I had in junior high, Mr. Simmons. We had a test where he had a fellow student grade the papers. Spelling counted on this test. I used to make the lowercase e differently than normal, but it was still obviously a lowercase e. The idiot who I was unfortunate enough to have graded my paper marked it as an F because he said my e's were incorrect. I took my paper to Mr. Simmons and complained. He took the dude's side and I kept the F. That, and whenever someone asked him what day it was, he would always say, Tuesday or whatever day it was, all day, unless it rains. It drove all of us crazy, and he would never explain. I'm in my 60s, and every time it rains, I think of that bastard. Story 7. A 7th grade science teacher told my parents I would never go to university. 2 degrees later, she can go fuck herself. Story 8. I loved singing as a child. I also came from a very poor home with limited opportunities outside of school. I auditioned and got into the school choir, something I'd always dreamed of. I was so excited. I was in year 3. The choir was made up mostly of the popular students. For some reason, and I've noticed this a few times from drama and music teachers, they have a tendency to pander to the popular students. Odd dynamik. Anyway, I was accepted and excited. Then, only a few days later, I was told there wasn't enough room in the choir group because one of the popular girls had returned to the school. So the teacher replaced my spot and gave it to the other girl instead. I was devastated. Story 9. My first grade art teacher tore me apart because I drew my people with their arms coming out of their heads instead of their bodies. She full-on raged at me like I had personally offended her, pointing to my picture and yelling, "Is this where your arms are? Do they come out of your ears?" I was only 6 years old, still learning head, shoulders, knees, and toes. So I kind of didn't know where my arms came out of. I'd never really thought about it before that moment. I just knew arms were up high, feet were down below, and the head was on top. I feel like I should have had some leniency for my artistic capabilities, all things considered, but I guess she didn't. I probably couldn't even pronounce shoulders, right, because of my little kid lisp. She made me cry because I couldn't understand what I'd done so wrong to make an adult that mad at me. I still have no idea why she was so furious about a 6-year-old not knowing body parts yet. It's such a weird memory for me.
It wasn't about you. I'm so sorry this happened. This wasn't okay at all, but I'm going to assume her spouse left her and was cheating on her, or something happened, and she took that rage out on a 6-year-old. I hope she quit or was fired so no one else had to experience that.
Story 10. My 5th grade teacher had a pet tarantula in the classroom. There was a desk right next to it, and he sent troublemakers back there to sit. I was deathly afraid of spiders. I told him my parents told him, but I still had to sit back there. I would cover my eyes in fear, and he would just smirk at me. It's one of the first examples where I realized that small people will use whatever power they can muster over others. Story 11. In 2nd grade, my teacher wouldn't help me with a problem I couldn't understand, and she wouldn't let me go to recess unless I figured it out. Story 12. U.S. Navy Tech School. I had an instructor in basic electronics who was more worried about his numbers than actually teaching us how to do the job. He would boast about the number of students passing his class. Chuckles. I thought it was funny when he would walk behind us during the tests and read the questions that were hanging us up. Multiple choice, and he would slam his finger on the table and say, "What else could it be? I don't know how you don't see the answer." Or, "What do you think the answer is?" I thought it was funny back then, but honestly, it set us up for failure later on. Story 13. My English teacher in the 2nd grade of primary school slapped me during an English lesson. I don't remember what I did or said wrong that day, but I still don't think she was entitled to slap me in the face in front of my classmates. Back then, I had no clue that the teacher wasn't supposed to slap the kid, so I didn't tell anyone. That's the brief story of my Ukrainian childhood. Story 14. I will never forget my 3rd grade teacher, Mrs. Perna, telling me to sit down, dummy, when I got up to ask a question during a test. I loved school so much up until that moment. I had so much potential. Story 15. My 10th grade math teacher who'd scream, "You're all useless," every time someone got a problem wrong. She made half the class cry at least once. I still hate math because of her. Story 16. I had a professor who I believed was one of the few people I've ever met who had true narcissistic personality disorder. You weren't allowed to ask questions, and he would shame you in front of everyone if you did. He never smiled once. It's like he came in every day looking for a fight and to bully students. Everything was always the student's fault. Even when he messed up the settings on the machinery we had to use, he never acknowledged he made a mistake. It was really insane. He was a soulless person. A ton of people complained about him.
Chuckles. That sounds just like my inorganic chemistry professor. He was awful and just mad at the world.
Story 17. My sophomore year Algebra 2 teacher. He was sexist as hell and would get frustrated if the girls asked questions, so we would have the guys do it. I failed and then took it in summer school with a much better teacher and got perfect scores on almost everything. I took that teacher again my junior year for pre-calculus and calculus. Unfortunately, I heard recently the better teacher was charged for having relationships with minor female students, and it both devastated me and made me so angry and disgusted. So both of them in different ways. Story 18. Isn't it amazing how being humiliated by a teacher can change the trajectory of a kid's schooling and how they never forget it for the rest of their lives? For me, it was the arrogant and snotty 10th grade Spanish teacher. I was pretty good at Spanish and wanted to study it for 4 years in high school to become semi-proficient. He embarrassed me by holding up my homework like it was dirty or something and told me he would not accept papers folded in half. I protested because that meant I had to carry home folders, not just books. I had to ride my bike to school, and in those days we didn't use backpacks. I don't know why we hadn't figured that out yet, so I had to bungee cord my books onto the book rack over the back wheel. Folders got bent, so everything in them got bent too. Papers were worse off in my folders than folded into my books, and no teacher had ever been bothered by that before. He looked really irritated after I protested. He said he didn't care and repeated that he wouldn't accept folded paper. He only said this to me, not the whole class. I sat in the front right near his podium. After that, I had to take home a large book every day to support the folder. The rest of the year, I kept my mouth shut, but he still sneered at me and then manipulated my grade calculation to give me a B+ instead of the A I'd clearly earned. My dad went with me to the dean to complain, and the dean said, "The only one who can change your grade is the teacher or the school board." Then he laughed and very patronizingly said, "It's not like you won't get into Berkeley because you have 1 B on your report card." He didn't care at all that the teacher had manipulated the grade to screw me. I stopped taking Spanish after that. Side note, when I was a senior, nobody in my class got into Berkeley, including one of the straight-A students. The school didn't offer calculus or enough AP classes. That dean was an idiot. Years later, I told this story to one of my kids' high school teachers at a private school. The teacher said, "Oh, I don't doubt that for a second. I saw teachers at my old public school do that to kids they didn't like." Story 19. Chuckles softly, my high school math teacher kept telling me that if I spent 10% of the time I spent fixing computers on my math homework, I'd be acing her class. Fixing computers turned into a lucrative career for me. I have yet to use polar graphing or the quadratic equation.
I'm over 50 years old and have never used polar graphing. I've used quadratic equations exactly 2 times after leaving school, and I could have gotten the answer I needed without that.
Story 20. My 9th grade teacher was fired for purposely failing her students. My class was sad to see her leave despite that.
Maybe if you had learned subject-verb agreement, her job would have been saved.
I wish my university had done the same, but alas.
Story 21. There was a physical education teacher we had in high school who always used to spot girls when they were bench pressing. He always wore shorts and leaned over way farther than he needed to. Fuck that guy. Story 22. My first college writing 121 professor spent 2 days name-dropping all the important Hollywood people and authors he's friends with. He asked us to read 2 200-page books in 2 weeks, asked us to debate the idea of truth, and told us he never gives out A's. It was giving. I wish I wasn't a writing 121 teacher at a community college, and I'm gonna make it your problem. I dropped the class so fast, took a painting class instead for the term. The next term, I took the class with a lovely professor who actually helped me learn how to write a college essay. Fuck you, George.
I wouldn't mind if it wasn't an introductory class. Writing 121 is supposed to be how to write a college essay and how to write at college level. Friends who have completed his class still don't know how to do those things and are struggling in other classes now.
Story 23. I had an IT teacher who took an arbitrary dislike to a group of students. With this list of enemies, he went out of his way to try to fuck them over by intentionally giving them the wrong criteria for a piece of coursework that would affect their final grade. He tried to brazen it out by saying, "Oh, some of the old ones got mixed in," and they coincidentally landed on the people he hated. On top of that, he was a prolific bully, which got so bad one of his victims told their dad, who then came into school and punched him. Some say he just went down, others say he was knocked all the way out. He was placed on indefinite sabbatical. Story 24. Ms. Bradley in English 101 graded the class as if she was pissed at all the students who didn't get accepted into Harvard. Story 25. My ninth grade math teacher from my old high school was generally an insufferable person overall. One time, he didn't let me use the bathroom even though I was bursting to pee. And you can guess what happened next. Story 26. My first through fourth grade teacher. She was physically and mentally abusive. She bashed my face into a piano once. Blood was gushing down my face, and no one ever did anything about it.
I appreciate your empathy. There wasn't much of that going around in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up.
I wish I could do something about it. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Honestly, this chokes me up.
Story 27. My fourth grade teacher failed me. That year, I went to 4 different schools. At one point, I was sent to live with my grandparents, way out in the literal middle of nowhere, surrounded by cornfields in every direction. I rode a bus 45 minutes each way to a tiny rural public school. Every school was teaching a different curriculum, and somehow I was expected to keep up with all of it.
To be fair, she probably didn't have a choice if your grades were poor or non-existent.
For sure. I couldn't keep up. Still hated her though, chuckles.
Story 28. I found so many college professors to be horrible. Literally just reading the textbook to us with zero preparation. Paying $40,000 a year for so many of them. Story 29. Is it the 6th grade teacher who regularly bullied all her students? Is it the 8th grade teacher who yelled at someone for a personal essay and made the students sing kindergarten songs to her stuffed Care Bear? Is it the high school honors math teacher who was fired after teaching the honors class about triangles, and only triangles, for 6 weeks? Is it the teacher who got angry that no one understood a single foreign language question out of 20? And because no one understood it, they did not answer, so she gave an entire class detention for failing to finish their homework? Or was it the calculus teacher who said, "Just read the book," and flirted with the 4.0 students while 75% of the class was failing? At least I only doubled up on bad teachers for 6 weeks. Story 30. My 5th grade math teacher returned to work shortly after a stroke, and only half her face moved. The issue was her speech. No one could understand her, and she loved to lecture. I felt bad for her, we all did, but I almost failed math that year. Story 31. Actually, I had her twice. She was our 1st grade teacher. Even though it was 1979-80, she was still smacking people with rulers for writing left-handed. I was fully ambidextrous, but she kept hitting the left-handed kid who sat in front of me. Then she'd criticize his handwriting. That's the story of how I became mostly right-handed. I chose not to be hit. I remember being scared of her. Fast forward to 4th grade. Wonderful teacher. We had her for kindergarten. Then she got sick. Our 1st grade teacher was apparently now a substitute and was hired to finish out the year. I think everyone in class ended up sitting in the hall at least once. The punishment for what she deemed misbehavior. This included asking too many questions. So kids who were slower or neurodivergent, undiagnosed because it was the 80s, had to go sit in the hall much more frequently. I think the principal knew what was up. One time, I was in the hall with the 2 guys who were held back in 1st grade and my neighbor. The principal came by and asked why we were out there. I don't remember our exact words, but it was basically, "You know how she is." He just snorted and moved on. The worst thing she ever did, though, was to the kid sitting next to me. He had his headphones sitting behind his ears, not in them. Rich kid, no one else had them. Probably had strict orders not to lose them. She yelled at him to take them out of his ears. He said they weren't. I vouched that they weren't. She came running down the aisle and took a flying tackle right at him. We were in the back row in those desk chair combos. He and the desk tipped backwards and out of the chair. She wrenched them off his head and confiscated them. I want to say she broke them in the process, but I don't remember for sure. She was generally abusive, and I hope she never had a full-time job as a teacher again. Story 32. Nothing bad morally, but I took calculus in high school, then had to take it again in college because they didn't accept it. I got an A in high school and a B- in college. There was one homework assignment where almost the whole class got the same answer, which was different from the answer key. We asked the teacher to show us the solution, so he did it and got a completely different answer from the majority of the class and the answer key. He looked at the board for a few minutes in silence before saying, "Well, I messed up in there somewhere and I'm not sure. Let's just move on to the next question. And wiped the board clean. It made me wonder if I really got a better grade than he gave me. Story 33. In 4th grade, my teacher was out of school for about 2 weeks with chicken pox. On her first day back, my class had started doing multiplication tables, and she called on me to recite what I knew. I could only go up to my 5s. That bitch stood me in front of the class and said, "I just want everyone to see how stupid insert name here is. Don't end up like her. She'll end up being a nobody because she doesn't know her multiplication tables." Mortified 9-year-old kid. She planted my math anxiety right then and there while she laughed her oldest off at me. I will say most of my classmates didn't say anything or laugh. Story 34. Mr. Stewart, 9th grade beginning algebra. I already had some difficulty with math. His style of teaching, which was to belittle you in a loud, scathing tone if you asked a question, gave me severe math anxiety that lasted for decades. Is it hot in hell, Mr. Stewart? Story 35. 3rd grade substitute teacher. She was there almost a year. An ex-nun, angry and bitter. She told my mom I was stupid, no future for me. Hello? I was 8 and she was an adult. Worst experience. Story 36. In 1980, I went to a small school in the countryside in California for my 8th grade year. The teacher was sexist and called me hippo for most of the year. It really made me upset and mad. So, I called him just by his last name and slurred it as much as I could, which pissed him off because he would tell me to call him Mr. So-and-so, to which I told him no, I would not because my name was not Hippo. In retrospect, I really wish I had told my dad about it. Story 37. Middle school guidance counselor. I told her about being abused at home, and she called my mom, put her on speakerphone, and made me recite what I told her. I guess, looking back, she thought I was lying, but I was genuinely scared to go home and had hoped that she could help me. I didn't even know at the time that teachers are mandated reporters, and she never reported anything. It sucked and also made the situation way worse, and I just had to deal with it until I turned 18. Story 38. 3rd grade. I was an anxious, meek child. I guess I just got under her skin or whatever, because I had a tendency to freeze and go mute if asked a direct question. So one day when we were learning how to tell time, she asked me what time it was and I shut down. She made me stand in front of the class and stare up at the wall clock while yelling, "What time is it? What time is it?" until I started crying. Then she wrote a note for me to take to mom to sign, presumably about me being just the worst 8-year-old ever, and I got the belt that night. Fuck you, Mrs. Furnett of Sweetgrass Elementary School in Edmonton, Alberta, 1983. You cunt. Story 39. My geography teacher used to constantly call me out in front of the class to humiliate me, saying I'd never become anything. She knew very well that geography was really hard for me. Instead of helping me, she kept failing me. But the funny part is, 5 years later, she ordered $300 worth of crocheted products from me. Then I messaged her, saying, "Here's the student you used to tell everyone would never become anyone. I hope you'll like my products." And to this day, she still tells her current students not to be like me. Story 40. My teacher in year 4, equivalent to 3rd grade in the United States. He just never seemed to like me at all, and inexplicably kicked me out of a physical education lesson when I got a bit upset, because, and I quote, "I'm getting quite bored with you." The head teacher found me in the corridor immediately after that, and to say he was unimpressed was something of an understatement. The very next day, I ended up spending a bit of time out of the class each afternoon with one of the teaching assistants for a couple of years, and those sessions basically, in my mind at least, ended up forming part of my autism diagnosis. Story 41. Sister Rose Marie Weepai of the Sisters of St. Francis in Dubuque, Iowa, worked at Sacred Heart School in the 1970s through the 1980s, teaching grades 4, 5, and 6. She was a child abuser, scratching kids with her nails, picking them up by their ears. Literally batshit crazy, and had no business being near children. She has forever colored my vision of Catholicism and nuns. Happily, she is dead now, roasting in hell where she belongs. Story 42. Mrs. Rothwell, high school math teacher. She spit when she talked. She had blackboards that wrapped around the whole room, and at the beginning of class, she would assign each student a problem from the homework to put on the board. If yours was correct, you got to sit down. If it wasn't, you had to stand up there until you got it right. I was terrible at math. Every day, I would be the last kid standing at the blackboard. She would let me stand there until the end of class, every single day. 5 minutes before the bell rang, she would berate me in front of the whole class, telling me things like, just solve the problem. And, what's the next step? Well, if I knew how to solve the problem or the next fucking step, then I'd have been sitting down 35 minutes ago. So every day, I was completely embarrassed in front of the entire class, usually with tears streaming down my face. She was awful during tests too, because she would walk around and peer over your shoulder, making nasty remarks about how wrong you were so far. My tests were always splattered with her spit and my own tears by the time I turned them in. I had such a bad relationship with math that I majored in English in college because it was the only major that required just one math class. Story 43. Community College, United States history teacher. He had us read out of the textbook popcorn style for most of the semester. There were 2 instances where he actually told us information that was not on the page in front of us. The first time it happened, I was surprised that he was giving us info outside the textbook. A little shocked, really. We continued reading from the textbook, and when we turned the page, there was all the information word for word. He had skipped ahead and read from a related section. The second time he brought up information not on the page, I skipped ahead a page or 2 and found the section he was reading from. Once we hit the World War II era, he just played history movies. We had like 4 weeks of just movies. He assigned a paper on one of the movies with a vague prompt. Basically, pick a topic from the movie and write about it. Most of the class did horribly on the paper. When I asked him what he was looking for, he said no one talked about Hitler's rise to power. Yeah, no shit. You told us we could write about anything the movie covered. Whatever. The community college gave us those professor rating sheets at the end of the semester. My review was scathing. I also had a very bad teacher when I transferred to a 4-year university. She was new to teaching and very nervous. The first time I had her, she spent the review class before the first exam doing one problem. She could not figure it out. She restarted it at least 2 times. Near the end of the class, someone asked her if this kind of problem would be on the exam. She said yes. Then the guy retorted, "But you can't do it." That shook her. She tried to start a new problem, got flustered at the first hurdle, and ended the class 15 minutes early. I dropped the class. I had her for a different class a year later. She had marginally improved at teaching, not as nervous. Story 44. English teacher in 7th grade, if I recall correctly. About 25 years ago. I am autistic but was undiagnosed at the time. I had a lot of issues getting work done, keeping my backpack organized, and so on. And she used to make a big show out of making me dump out and organize my backpack in front of the entire classroom. It happened multiple times. Loudly criticize any mistakes I made, purposely pick me to answer difficult questions, and so on. Nobody liked her because she was genuinely a rotten person, but for some reason, I seemed to be her main target. Honestly, about half the faculty at my school were pretty rotten. I also remember a new principal took over while I was in high school, and she became known for baiting kids into saying things to suspend them. For example, I was involved in a minor verbal altercation with another student who started making fun of me. We basically just shouted for all of 10 seconds, and she happened to walk by. She took me aside, put on this sweet attitude of, "Oh, I bet that other kid's saying that made you mad." Huh? It's okay. I understand. Then she asked, "When he insulted you, did you feel like hitting him?" I said no. And then she asked me several more times in a row. After like 3 times, I said something like, "I mean, sure, but I wouldn't." And she actually screamed at me that I was wrong for thinking that, and gave me in-school suspension for like 2 days. I think, like, bitch, you basically forced me to say it. Story 45. My 8th grade teacher pulled me and 2 others out of class to chastise us for choosing public high schools. She said we would amount to nothing. I went back after I graduated as a veterinarian to remind her of her ways. She did not take it well. Chuckles. Story 46. High school physical education teacher and driver's education stories. Number 1, freshman year. I knew I had asthma, so I wasn't running. I was jogging. He got on my case. So I ran. I almost blacked out. Then I heard the woman PE teacher rip into him. Number 2, driver's education. Driving into the sun early morning on a road full of S-curves and stop signs. I came up to a stop sign. I could see glass in the road from a previous accident and a truck preparing to turn onto the road I was on. The teacher yanked my will toward the truck to avoid the glass. Lucky we didn't hit Mr. Farmer Man or die. Number 3, sophomore year PE. He's pretty into the volleyball game he's supervising. I'm still pretty annoyed by his existence and competitive all rolled into one. He's yelling at me not to let the ball hit the floor. I twisted, but incorrectly. Kept the ball off the floor, but that night my knee was the size of that volleyball. Turns out I ripped up the ligaments. Ended up in physical therapy, not PE, 2 separate braces, a note stating I'm not to participate. School rules said he had to pass me and couldn't fail me. At this point, our disgust with one another was mutual. I completed both driver's ed and my PE requirements, so I never dealt with him again. Story 47. The elementary school librarian. That old hag used to bark at students. 6th grade library studies was the only class I ever failed. Story 48. Mrs. Bohan, 5th grade. She was an angry old lady with a marionette mouth and wore a scarab brooch on her chest. The brooch moved. It was a big insect under the brooch, like a Madagascar cockroach or something. Chuckles. It was hard to learn anything from a woman with a cockroach crawling around her breasts. Story 49. One professor at my college was especially demoralizing. He was known for failing students. It's one thing to deliver demanding lessons, and I've taken other classes where I was proud of my work, but with this guy, it felt especially pointless. Difficult, lengthy readings and tedious pop quizzes on little facts you might miss. He would open class with topical segments. He loved to go on about how graduates aren't necessarily finding work that their degree used to guarantee, which around 2010 was a relevant, somewhat new topic. But it was also the single most discouraging topic for someone facing a particularly challenging class. He gave us all the components to add up. Why am I even doing this? He hated our generation. The point of it all seemed like punishment. Story 50. High school home economics teacher. She didn't really teach us much. She was absent a whole lot of days and played the movie Fireproof, starring Kirk Cameron. Emphasize, every single day, /emphasize on the TV in class. Chuckles. Story 51. Slight chuckle, my associated student body teacher who acted like she was still part of the high school popular group. Naturally, she's a principal of a school now. I've had worse teachers than her from an actual teaching standpoint, but she was always a model of how I didn't want to be as an adult. Story 52. I wouldn't say she was the worst teacher, but as a teenager, she seemed strict and disciplined. I thought she was being mean. She had a reputation for grading strictly. I was a freshman in high school, 9th grade, but in reality, she was just preparing us for college, for those who went, and the real world. Story 53. Reminiscent. I had this really old, really large teacher for anthropology. He would fall asleep on his pedestal seat when we watched videos in class. Chuckles. He would drone on and on about the Scottish Highland Games. His wife was a nurse or a doctor, and he would tell these crazy stories about babies being born with bullet heads and babies born with their hearts outside of their chests. Why did I take the class? It was an all-boys high school, and it was one of the only classes that we shared with the all-girls school next door. Story 54. In high school, I had a math teacher who just very slowly read out of the textbook. Some of us realized that we could just tune her out, read the book ourselves faster, and have our homework done by the end of class. Then one day she just disappeared. Didn't show up. No warning, nothing. One of the smarter kids just started leading the class while the office was figuring out what was going on and what to do with us. They did it better than the actual teacher. Kept doing it for a few days until they found us a long-term substitute teacher with a lesson plan. We never learned what happened to the actual teacher. Story 55. I had a terrible babysitter my senior year. This dude could never admit he was wrong. He'd make up these elaborate tales and force everyone to take notes on them. I started ignoring him and just reading the book myself, only for him to grade our tests based on his bullshit instead of the information in the book. Once, he demanded we all study for a test the next day, but then had to do admin work all period and refused to teach. My friend and I started reading Popcorn. We had one of the last books he hadn't lent out. After reading a paragraph, I looked up to see the entire class paying attention, so I went to the front of the class to make it easier. He flipped out when I tried to fire up the overhead projector, so I said, "I'm just teaching these kids because you won't." And he shut the fuck up after that. Needless to say, I met with the principal over that, only to realize he was married to the head of the science department, a truly wonderful instructor, and had tenure. Story 56. I had a teacher my sophomore year who fought tooth and nail against my ADHD accommodations, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder accommodations, and tried to do everything in her power not to allow me to have them. I got diagnosed during that school year and was failing her class due to the heavy workload that I just wasn't able to keep up with. I'm not sure exactly how it was decided, but I was put into the remedial version of the same class, same material but less homework. My grades started to improve, and before I knew it, I had gone from failing to having an A in her class. While that should have been a sign that my medication and the accommodations I was getting were helping me to succeed, she decided to push for me to be put back into the class I was in before. When they did, my grades started to slip almost right away, and before I knew it, I was struggling to maintain a passing grade again. Story 57. I wrestled as a girl. I had a six-pack. The teacher called me a behemoth because I had more muscles than he did. Fuck that dead asshole. Story 58. Fifth grade teacher. She would humiliate students by scolding them as if they were idiots whenever they made a mistake. She made some of them cry, including me. I can feel myself getting stressed as I type this. Story 59. High school Spanish teacher. Little old lady who would embarrass students seemingly every day for not understanding or not doing the homework. Whatever. She seemed to revel in it. I wish I had more of a backbone back then, but I was a scared kid, so she scared the shit out of me. I learned nothing. Story 60. In fourth grade, we had those desks where you could lift the top and store your school supplies inside. My fourth grade teacher expected them to be very tidy and perfectly organized. She would check them every so often to make sure they met her standards. One day, mine didn't pass her inspection. As punishment, I had to stand against the wall and hold a chair position squat for 10 minutes. Let's just say, as a kid that age, I can still remember how much my legs hurt and burned. When I told my mom about it the next day, she marched up to the school and gave that teacher a piece of her mind. The most ironic thing happened when I was in high school and could drive. I went to the local mall and pulled up next to a minivan. The lady got out with two kids, and I recognized her as that teacher. I could never forget her after that incident. As I walked near her minivan in the parking lot, the trash on the back floors and seats made me think she was a hoarder, or maybe her kids were. Either way, I told my mom about it, and we had a good laugh. Story 61. My 12th grade biology teacher in senior high school was horrible at her job. She was such a psychopath that even the headmaster didn't want to mess with her. Normally, I was the golden boy type of student with good grades and great manners. Every teacher I had formed a positive opinion of me, even though the feeling wasn't always mutual. That woman hated me intensely, probably because she understood I didn't respect her or even need to listen to her. My mother is also a biology teacher, and a much more competent one at that. Story 62. One of the professors in my industrial design courses was awful. He loved ripping into designs in front of the entire class. He also had a system where he would let you resubmit assignments near the end of the year, so you could incorporate his feedback and get a better grade. But my classmates and I did exactly that, putting in additional work to incorporate his feedback, only for him to say he liked the original more and give us a worse grade. The program also had a very low acceptance rate, yet all of his kids managed to get in. Meanwhile, people kissing his ass and pulling all-nighters didn't. Story 63, third grade teacher, for sure. She was known as a really bad teacher by former and current students. She would shout and scream every day so loudly at everyone that every other class could hear her. I heard later that one girl was receiving emotional counseling even as an adult because of that. That was back in 1985 or so. Story 64. My dad, who I love, just screamed at me while trying to get me to learn how to drive a manual transmission. He didn't seem to get that I didn't understand how the thing worked, and with the internet in its infancy, there may not even have been any such resources, but I doubt we knew to even search for them. We had a computer, but our internet was basically just AOL, and it would be more than a decade before YouTube existed. I'll be teaching my kids to drive soon, but I don't have access to a manual transmission car, so it'll be easier for them to learn in my 2024 Maverick, which has a dial shifter automatic transmission. However, I think it's a shame because I believe learning how to drive stick is an essential part of the knowledge base required for operating a motor vehicle. I'm now an expert at it, and I think I could teach my kids without yelling. YouTube videos of how things work will probably be helpful as well. Story 65. In 8th grade at a Catholic school, I had blue eyes and naturally dark eyelashes. One of the nuns repeatedly made me wash my face because she insisted I was wearing eye makeup, even though I wasn't. Ironically, her favorite student wore bright blue mascara every day. It was the 80s, and she was never questioned. One time, she tripped over books left on the floor. When the class laughed, she singled me out and yelled at me. I still don't know why she hated me. Story 66. My 3rd grade teacher told me right to my face that I'd had a terrible upbringing. She made a potty joke when she found out my childhood nickname. Just an awful, awful woman. My hair fell out that year. She also called another child slow in front of the whole class because I showed the classmate a picture I drew and got accused of distracting her. She said, "You know better than to distract Name. She's slow." Story 67. I was in the 10th grade, and the teacher looked at me and said, "Who are you?" in a condescending way in front of the class. I was already struggling to get to school each day because of my horrible home life. It just took away the little motivation I had. Story 68. I had an 8th grade math teacher who was a bully. I had just moved to a very small town compared to the big city I had lived in before. I was severely depressed. The town hated new people, so I struggled a lot with getting along with anyone. And I was just an introvert. She did not like that. So when parent-teacher conferences came around, she gathered up all of my teachers to tell my mom I was extremely rude and standoffish because I didn't speak. I sat at the back, did my work, got excellent scores, and then read my book silently. But you'd think if a child didn't speak for 3 months, you'd probably report that to a counselor rather than just hatefully offload it on her mom in front of her. I sat there silently. All but one teacher jumped on her bandwagon. The one teacher said I was quiet but occasionally told her funny stories about my old science teacher who was a nut, and that I was polite and smart. I loved her. I talked a lot more in her class after that and actually made friends. The math teacher would dress code me when we wore the exact same top. She called students dumb. She gave me bad grades even when I had more right answers than my peers. We eventually had to have a meeting with the principal where I finally spoke up, called her a bully, and told her how unsafe I felt in her class. She was eventually told to resign or she'd be fired. Story 69. He was my 5th and 6th grade teacher. He was a jerk who often talked smartaliki to me and punished me. Story 70. Ugh, lol. My high school algebra teacher. He was the biggest douchebag ever. I have slight dyslexia, and I just couldn't comprehend the assignments. I just could not understand them. And he was so mean to me. This one time, he told me I was dumber than a monkey in front of the whole class and threw a chalkboard eraser at me. My friend was in the class, and he told him off to the point where everyone was shocked at what he said. The F-bomb was dropped, and the word asshole was used. Story 71. I had a professor in college whose seminar I was taking. It met once a week for over 3 hours. I missed 1 week because of the flu, which then turned into bronchitis. He told me that if I missed another class, I would fail. So I showed up, coughing up a lung, and he yelled at me multiple times for being disruptive to the dialogue, to the point that I started crying. He did a lot of other things that semester as well. He had been a beloved professor, But every single student in our 10-person class provided severely negative feedback on the anonymous end-of-semester review. Professors weren't supposed to see them, or even have access to them, until after they had graded the exams and submitted our grades for the course. But this asshole showed up to the final and said something about being disappointed that none of us understood what he was trying to teach all semester, and hoped we'd jibe better with our other professors and develop thicker skin. We banded together after the exam and sent a group email to the chair of the department and the dean of students, complaining that he had clearly read our reviews already, as well as reiterating the lowlights from the semester. Our exams were graded by someone else, and he announced his retirement the next week. I'm still pissed about it. I had really wanted to study abroad in Rome, but it was the only semester I'd be able to take that particular seminar, which was on the Aeneid, which I love. So I stayed and then went through this bullshit. Story 72. I had a music appreciation teacher in middle school. He had a mental break and started throwing desks at us. Yeah, 2 teachers dragged him off down the hallway, and he got arrested. Story 73. 10th grade chemistry teacher. She was also the leader of the Unite Club, which was supposed to bring together people from all walks of life. I knew other people who had reached out to her because they were struggling at home, and she helped them. So I felt safe reaching out to her, but she treated it as crocodile tears. I didn't get the help I needed, and she treated me with distrust and generally disliked me as a person for the rest of the year. Story 74. Mrs. Turner, 1st grade. We used the SRA reading system, which was color-coded as one moved up in reading comprehension. It began at turquoise, I think, and ran up to silver and gold. I was a good reader, so a boy in the class and I were neck and neck heading towards gold. Every week, Turner would announce who was going on to which level. The boy and I were at silver. She announced first that the boy was going on to gold. Okay, 6-year-old me thinks, my turn next. Oh no. Bitch Turner then announces that I will be going back to turquoise to encourage the slower readers. It would be years before I understood internalized misogyny and the unfairness of an adult teacher offloading her job onto a 6-year-old. But wherever you are, Mrs. Turner, I hope it is in hell. Story 75. 4th grade teacher, Mr. Sapikian. If he deemed your desk too messy, he would dump out the contents on the floor and throw the desk. If we weren't reading enough, he would sweep all the books off the shelves to the floor. The shelves were about 3 feet off the ground, and across the entire classroom he would scream and slam his fists on his desk. He would kick the trash cans across the room. This was in 1980. Couldn't tell on him because our principal walked around with a wooden paddle. Not a safe space. This is why I was involved with my boys' classes. Nothing like that was to be repeated. Ha ha ha. I just traumatized myself by typing this out. Story 76. The worst teacher I ever had was my history teacher in 9th grade. I actually liked her until one incident changed everything. I was good at art, and one day I drew a caricature of her during class. It was a well-made sketch, and I showed it to her, thinking she might appreciate it. Instead, she became furious. She humiliated me in front of the entire class, saying it wasn't funny, and then took me to the staff room where she threatened to complain to my parents. That experience completely shattered my confidence. Story 77. She spent the entire hour lecturing us on wasting time every single day. We had to teach ourselves 7th grade science at home. In hindsight, she prepared me for working at Walmart. Story 78. When I was in 7th grade in the late 1990s, I had a substitute teacher who looked like a Hells Angels member. He had a horrible personality, and we were all afraid of him because he was constantly insulting and hitting us for the smallest things. He was also really lazy, and often instead of teaching, he would either sleep or read the newspaper with his legs on the desk while we wrote essays. My handwriting at the time was particularly bad, and one day he yelled at me, not asked, to show him my homework so he could correct any potential spelling or grammar mistakes. He soon started to correct the paper with a disgusted face. After a couple of minutes, he ripped up the paper, grabbed me by the collar and said, "You got a brain as big as a peanut." As I wrote before, we were used to being insulted, but those words broke me. Took me a while to feel confident again in my academic abilities. Thank God, after 2 months of hell, our original teacher returned from maternity leave, but I never forgot those words, even after 27 years. Story 79. My human geography teacher made group chats with his favorite students and talked shit about the students he didn't like in them. He was a disgusting person. Story 80. It wasn't a teacher. It was the high school counselor I had in 11th grade. I went in to discuss options for college after I graduated from high school. It was still a year away, but I thought it was something I should look into as soon as possible. She was a very old white woman. I am Mexican American. She asked about my family's finances. After I answered her, she tried to convince me to get a GED so that I could find a job to help my family. She said she knew of factories in my city that would hire me right away. I told her that I came in asking about college options and she's trying to get me to quit school to work in a factory. She responded by saying that she was only offering me options. I believed at the time, and still do, that she was getting some sort of kickback for every referral she made to a plastics plant that was hiring. Story 81. Ooh, that's a tough one to answer. I moved around a few times as a kid. Let's see. In 8th grade, we had a gym teacher who tried to come into the girls' locker room while we were changing, gave dieting magazines to one of the girls, and called one of us a bitch during advisory. Had a math teacher at that same school who would take you out into the hallway and scream at you if you didn't do your homework. Also told me I was dumb, which did wonders for my self-esteem. The third is also a math teacher, but really wasn't as bad as the first two I mentioned. I had to take pictures of my graded assignments because he would put in the grade book that I never turned them in. Also didn't like me because I told him he looks like Kip from Napoleon Dynamite. Story 82. My 2nd grade teacher. I wasn't paying attention, and she grabbed my hair and shook my head back and forth in front of the entire class. When she let go, my head hit the desk. This was in the 70s. In today's world, she would go to jail. Story 83. My graduate advisor said the only way I could land a research project was to bruise my knees at conferences. Chuckles. Story 84. I got a hairline fracture on the thumb of my dominant hand in elementary school, necessitating a butterfly splint to immobilize the thumb. My teacher was absent the day I came to school with that splint, and the substitute had another student scribed for me. The next day, my teacher chewed me out in front of all my peers over it. I was such a shy child who was also very bright and compliant. I meekly tried to explain it, and I remember her forcefully countering with, "Who is the teacher?" It was humiliating. Story 85. In 8th grade English, we just watched movies and did extremely remedial assignments. He let us sit on the computers and download songs and games from Napster. Everyone in the class got an A. I didn't learn a damn thing for a whole year. Story 86. I had a teacher at my primary school who was extremely strict. If you did something wrong, you knew about it because she would tell you off straight away. My mom and I used to nickname her Cruella de Vil, Chuckles, and when she was out of earshot, we would sing the song from 101 Dalmatians when my mom came to pick me up at the end of the school day. There were a few supply teachers at secondary school I didn't like also. There was one who was a keen chess player, and he took an instant dislike to me when he had to step in during an English class due to the usual teacher being ill. My friends and I hadn't finished our conversation when he started the lesson, and he immediately decided we were disruptive. He got another staff member to take us out of the room and teach us away from the rest of the class. Then there was another supply teacher who had to take over a maths class towards the end of the summer term. It was the kind of time during the school year where the teachers basically just gave up and stuck a film on for an hour to make us all shut up. Unfortunately, this supply teacher had the absolute worst taste in movies I had ever seen. He made us suffer through the movie Norbit, which for some reason he thought was the funniest film he had ever seen. Story 87. My freshman geometry teacher regularly made female students cry, locked people in the classroom closet, flirted with another married math teacher, and was generally a shitty teacher overall. Ironically, he ended up as head of our school's teachers' union. Story 88. In 7th grade, our health teacher accused every black guy in our class of doing drugs. Then she didn't believe us when we told her none of them were on drugs. Story 89. Mrs. Lewis, my 1st grade teacher. She was an evil cunt. She would pull me out of my chair by my hair or dig her nails into my skin and drag me out of the classroom. I don't know why she didn't like me. I was quiet and tried not to draw attention to myself because I lost an eye to cancer. She made it her mission to abuse me almost daily. She got fired the next year for doing the same thing to a kid whose parents were rich and had power in that town. Story 90. I think it was 7th grade English. She told me I would graduate with a special diploma because I was in learning disabled classes. That was a lie. I graduated with a normal diploma, and it had nothing different written or stamped on it. She also complained that my family's cheering at an awards ceremony was too loud. I hated her. Story 91. 5th grade teacher. That bitch would yell at us for no good reason, not tell us when deadlines were due until the same day, and just doesn't give a shit. Story 92. 1st grade. She pulled my braid numerous times and was just mean and sadistic. We used to put our heads down on our desks after lunch. One day after heads down time was over, one girl must have fallen asleep and didn't wake up when the lights came on. So the teacher hid the girl's glasses and just one of her shoes. Everyone in the class came to school crying every single day. Fucking bitch. She died of cancer. Story 93. In 6th grade, my teacher did that swirly gesture by her temple with her finger, pointing it at me right in front of the class, basically calling me an idiot just because I asked a question. Story 94. I had an adjunct professor in college for mechanical dynamics. He stopped giving us our grades on quizzes, homework, and exams. None of us knew where we stood in that class. He also sucked at teaching. Story 95. I was a voice major in college. My freshman year, I had a voice teacher who was wonderful. She really cared about her students. Second year, I got a new teacher. She looked at what the original teacher had given me and said it was way too advanced for me. Nothing I ever did was right. She fought me the entire time about my voice part, saying that I wasn't really a mezzo-soprano. I was just too lazy to sing the high notes. Chuckles. Spoiler alert. Eventually she conceded that I actually am. She told me all I would ever amount to was singing in church. A couple of years after graduating, I made the Charlotte Symphony Choir. It's not exactly the Metropolitan Opera, but it wasn't just singing in church either. I emailed her to let her know. Her response: "Will you give the director my resume?" She made me hate singing for a very long time. Story 96. I was one of the older kids in my kindergarten class. My parents often took me to the library so I could already read. This classroom had an awesome play area. The teacher's rule was that the first to finish their ditto sheets got first choice of toys. Sitting next to me was a girl named Susie, who, in retrospect, was severely learning disabled and barely verbal. The teacher ignored her, and since I was first to complete my ditto sheets, she assigned me the task of helping Susie finish hers and explain why the shark shouldn't be grouped with the land animals. At 5 years old, I did not have the language or skills to help poor Susie, and I also missed out on the toys. I often wonder what happened to Susie and still feel guilty that I could not help her. Story 97. My 7th and 8th grade math teacher. I had coach for pre-algebra and algebra 1. He was a misogynistic jerk. He asked the boys, 7th and 8th graders, how far they got on their dates at school dances. He commented on girls' bodies and outfits. He tried to look up skirts and down shirts. After a while, I would mouth off and get sent to the office when he gave us time to work on homework. We had a girl and a boy who both started midway through the first semester of 8th grade algebra. He told the girl that she had to go back and do all of the homework assignments from the beginning of school, and if she didn't make a B average on them, then he would kick her out of class. She turned them in after just a week. She didn't miss a single problem. The boy was not asked to do the same. When it was time to enroll for 9th grade math, I had to have my current math teacher sign the paper. I genuinely thought I hated algebra. Turns out I just hated him, so I had put down geometry for 9th grade. He told me he wouldn't sign. He said I would flunk geometry because girls didn't understand abstract thinking. I asked him why he cared. He didn't like me and I didn't like him. He agreed to sign and told me not to come crying to him when I flunked. I loved geometry. I never missed a test question all year. I had an amazing teacher. He was the kind of teacher who kept a test file so we couldn't take our tests home with us. After I did so well on my first exam, I asked for special permission to send a copy to his box at school. My geometry teacher asked me why. I told him what my sleazy algebra teacher said about flunking geometry. My geometry teacher said not to worry. He sent a graded copy to him of every test I took that year. Story 98. That would be Mr. Barr, best known for rubbing his itchy crotch against all the female students' chairs.